Hello and welcome to another episode of Tangled Rights. I am one of your co-hosts, Justin W. Wilson, along with
Shane D. Cox, both still licensed attorneys.
still licensed somehow, don't know how. Anything that happens on here is not legal advice. Please consult your local counsel in whatever jurisdiction you're in. If you're in the Las Vegas area, Nevada, or Kansas, hit us up. We're happy to help you. Today we have a very special guest. Well, guests. I'll let him introduce himself. We've been talking for a second. Hi. How's it going?
Hey, how are you? This is John Pierce.
John, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a trial lawyer. I have a firm, John Pierce Law. I'm also the founder of a 501c4 organization called the National Constitutional Law Union, the NCLU. And so I'm a trial lawyer who used to be at the big sort of elite, global law firms, and then started my own firm several years ago in 2017. And just, with all that was happening in the world during that time frame, ended up kind of heading into a lot of litigations that involved a lot of kind of controversial kind of current events, like the Russia hoax representing Carter Page and George Papadopoulos. Ultimately got Papadopoulos pardoned by President Trump. And that kind of led to representing Mayor Giuliani in the Ukraine probe situation, Tulsi Gabbard against Hillary Clinton, Kyle Rittenhouse, January 6 defendants, and on and on. And so I just kind of found myself, in these kind of wild cases over the past several years in light of what's going on in the country.
Excellent. So that was actually one that I wanted to ask you about. I saw Tulsi Gabbard when I was looking at your website as one of the cases, one of the clients you've had. What was going on with her? I had no idea that she was in any litigation.
Yeah, so we represent my firm at that time is predecessor of my current firm. It's not the same firm. It was called Pierce Bainbridge at that time. We represented Tulsi Gabbard in two cases. The first was right after I think it was the first Democratic presidential debate in 2020, and she actually really surprised some folks with how good she did. And so she was the most searched candidate on Google for the 72 hours immediately afterward. And magically, of course, it turns out that the search results did not allow people searching for her to go to her website or to go to her fundraising page, et cetera. And so we sued Google, alleging that was essentially intentional. And then several months later, if you recall, Hillary Clinton made that Russian asset comment about Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah.
And so we sued Hillary Clinton for defamation. Both those cases ultimately were either dismissed or Tulsi decided to drop them. I think when she got out of that campaign, whether for financial reasons or just, didn't see the need to press them forward. So they didn't go very far,
Sure.
But we did represent her in those two things.
Yeah, I actually talk about that debate a lot. Given the current situation with who's running and everything, I point people to that debate with the exchange that Tulsi had with the current front runner for the Democrat Party. And I point out that Tulsi took Kamala from 14 to like 2% in the polling.
Yeah.
With some uncomfortable facts. I think that was a great debate for her. And actually, I'm libertarian. Not that I wouldn't, but I haven't voted for a Democrat in my adult life, as far as for the president in general. But I would absolutely have voted for Tulsi. I was a big fan of hers. I thought she had a bunch of great points, and I really like her position on global intervention from the United States standpoint, especially from her military background. I thought it was great.
Yeah, and by the way, my partner Roger Roots, who I think may be joining us here tonight, he's a libertarian. He's from Montana. He actually has run for a few offices out there in Montana as a libertarian, so he's very into that. I've always been a big fan of Tulsi as well. I think that she's authentic. I think she's intelligent, and I think that on that stage certainly she was by far the most qualified person to actually be running for president among those folks. And I think that's why you see many people. President Trump obviously has high regard for her. I think she's helping him prepare for the debate against Kamala. And, a lot of people on the right she's developed a real following on the right. So.
Yeah, I believe she switched. I think she left the Democrat Party after something in 2020 or 2021, if memory serves.
I think I think she's an independent. I don't think she actually switched to the Republican Party, but
Sure.
so, I mean, clearly she has broken with the current version of the Democratic Party.
Sure.
But I think she's an independent now.
Okay. So I want to kind of touch a little bit on your background just because you have a really interesting background. So this is more of an opinion question. What do you think is the most complicated case that you've worked on? Because it seems like you've worked on some pretty serious and in-depth litigation in your past. So I'm just curious what you think.
Yeah. In terms of sort of complicated case, kind of, just legally and factually, and whatnot, it would have to go back to my days at the massive firms like, really Quinn Emanuel. I was one of the junior partners sort of organizing and running the massive Apple versus Samsung kind of global intergalactic patent war that took many years and cost both sides, I'm sure, well into the nine figures, believe it or not. And so that was just, it's hard. It's just hard to put into words how, just incredibly complex and complicated that all was, because even though the dispute itself, in terms of what they were fighting over, wasn't necessarily the most complicated thing in the world, just the fact that there were so many actions going on in so many forums, around the world, both court and regulatory and
Sure.
arbitration was just, was just very.
That's funny. It makes me think of all those people you meet in law school that are like, oh, I want to do international corporate law. Okay, what does that even mean, dude? And then you hear about stuff like this where they do have, multi-jurisdictional, multi-country, a service or a product, and then you get involved in some litigation and it just ties everything together. I imagine that had to have been an absolute pain.
Yeah, it was, and it's really one of the things that kind of led me ultimately to start my own firm. I mean, obviously you make very good money, in those kind of firms as a partner and whatnot. But, I really like my time at Quinn Emanuel and other firms, but, in a certain respect, it can be a kind of a soul crushing experience. You're using your Harvard law degree to, create massive charts of which lawyer is going to depose which witness. And, it's just, the stuff we're doing now with these January 6 cases, with Joe Exotic, with, my case there for Kyle Rittenhouse. I mean, they're in their own way, they're much more challenging because they're so controversial and you get so much heat from, different parts of the political spectrum for taking those cases on. You can really get your teeth into them much more, and you really feel like you're putting your law degree to work, and you're making a difference with respect to cases that really matter to the Constitution and to, people's lives.
Right. And that was going to be another question I was going to ask, since it's an easy segue. What's it like having high profile clients or being involved in high profile cases?
Yeah, I've gotten really used to it at this point because I've just had so many in such a burst over the past 7 years. I would tell you at first it was very stressful and very disconcerting. Really my first couple clients that were really high profile were George Papadopoulos and Carter Page in the Russia hoax. And at that time, if you recall, that's really all anybody was talking about during that time frame was, Carter Page and the Mueller investigation and the David Horowitz IG report, from the FBI and just
Sure.
All those kind of things. And, I was actually doing that when I was sort of growing a big civil litigation and corporate litigation firm of my own back then, kind of different than now. And, it really, the death threats, and then, the fact that I had partners who didn't really like the fact that I was representing these people, and
Right.
I had litigation funders that didn't like that, and just the press that came along with it. You can't really replicate that until you go through it sort of the first time, and you actually survive the experience, even though you really get banged up a lot. So at this point, and Roger here, he's had more January 6 cases along with me than pretty much anyone. And he's had some other real high profile cases, including the Bundy Ranch case several years ago out there in the West. And so, it comes with a whole different set of challenges than your typical kind of corporate litigation at a big law firm. But I will tell you, it's much more fun and it's much more rewarding, to be honest.
Sure. Yeah, we actually, so we're plaintiffs' attorneys, and we've been plaintiffs' attorneys.
Personal injury, right?
Yeah, well, but other plaintiff stuff, like
Yep.
general civil lit, some contract, but primarily personal injury and things of that nature. But so when we talk about defense attorneys at these bigger firms, it's like, yeah, you made a bunch of money, but you sold your soul, kind of thing. So we were making some jokes before, like, oh yeah, these guys, they're on the forefront of a bunch of constitutional change and a bunch of really good stuff, and then we look backwards and like, oh, Wow.
You got to learn
He's
somewhere.
The big civil lit firm. That's awesome, man. So,
Yeah, exactly.
do you prefer, or before I get into that, sorry, Mr. Roots, you're with us now, right?
Yes, I am. Great to be with you.
Hi, it's good to have you here. I'm Justin, and this is Shane. We were talking a little bit. We just got his background, so do you want to fill us in on a little bit of your background, and then we can kind of go together, and I'll talk about some of these cases and get into Joe Exotic?
Yeah, I do mostly, I'd have to say, criminal. I'm mostly focused on criminal cases, unlike John. John has a great background with these great high-flying civil cases, $1 million things. I've been, honestly, probably the last several years anyways, I've been mostly on, sorry.
You're all right. You're all right.
Real life here.
Yeah. John mentioned the Bundy case. I worked on the Bundy case pretty much full time for about 2 years at least. Slept on couches. I probably was working 18 hours a day typing briefs. I don't know if you guys know about that case.
We do.
The government had accused. Actually, there were multiple fronts. There was the Oregon litigation and the Nevada.
Yeah.
In Oregon, these patriots had taken over a federal wildlife refuge, and it was quite a constitutional stand they took. It was very bold. And I worked with Ammon Bundy and Ryan Bundy. We ultimately got a full acquittal in Portland, Oregon. Some people called that the trial of the century. And then later on, the action moved to Nevada, where they have over, I think, 24 guys were accused of all these federal crimes, threatening federal officers, assaulting federal officers, extorting federal officers, for basically stopping the Bureau of Land Management from rounding up some cows. Mm-hmm. And anyway, so I worked on that case. We ultimately got a huge dismissal that was upheld by the Ninth Circuit. It still is one of the most cited cases now in terms of government misconduct. So I've worked. I have that kind of thing in my background. Mostly, I fight the government full time.
That sounds like the dream. As my fellow libertarian brother, that's great. Yeah, I think we actually have a client, a criminal defendant, who is he was a ranch hand for the Bundys. We picked up a case out in Mesquite where the guy, they've got him charged with possession of a firearm by a prohibited person and carrying concealed weapon without a permit. And he was one of the Bundy's ranch hands. That's what he does. He goes around the country working for these various ranches. And so I knew about it when it happened, obviously, but then, it's weird. Obviously not at your level, but you're sitting here taking clients, and I'm a big 2A guy myself, so I like to take those kind of cases. And this guy comes to me and he starts telling me his background, and I was like, oh, no way. It's really cool to get people who are tangentially related to stuff that's so big. I mean, we've had our firm for a year now, and I've only been licensed since 2017. So talking to guys like you, it's just, I don't know, it seems almost alien to have that opportunity to be able to speak to people who have done things that are as important and just have as much gravity as the things that you guys have done. It's pretty awesome, man. It's really cool.
Thank you.
All right, so
You're here because we responded to an Instagram post about some attorneys wanting to come on a podcast and kind of sharing a story about our beloved Joe Exotic. I think captured the world in COVID, watching his story and then what happened after. And you guys do represent him, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, we represent him now, and all the proceedings in which we're trying to, get him set free, and the various other things that are coming down the pike, including civil matters. And so, just to let you know how we got involved in the case, one of my clients and dear friends is Laura Loomer, who's a very active investigative journalist, conservative on the right in the MAGA world, former two-time congressional candidate. And she actually had him on his show, Loomer Unleashed, a few months ago. And, he was telling a story, and I had some general knowledge of the story from watching the show Tiger King on Netflix. But I didn't really, grasp the full extent of the injustice and kind of what happened to him as he described it on Laura's show. And, he said, look, I need better lawyers. I need, somebody who's going to really come in and fight and try to, take this new evidence that we have now and really try to, get me out of here. And so, we just connected through Laura, and we represented him for the last few months. Roger is really the driving force in those actions in the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, habeas proceeding, as well as the direct appeal, to try to get him set free. So, I'll let him kind of talk more about the details, the legal angle of it. But yeah, Joe is a great guy. We've been out to visit him twice at the federal prison. That's basically a medical facility there in Fort Worth, Texas. And it was really fascinating because, a lot of people don't realize that he was in prison when the Tiger King came out. So, the whole world viewed him as a sort of a global celebrity and a kind of a cultural icon, but he had actually never seen the show because he was in prison. And of course, never made a dime from it, wrongfully, which, we're going to try to remedy. But, so we actually downloaded the show onto a laptop, and we sat there and we watched the first season with him. That's the first time he saw it.
What did he think of it?
I think that, he likes, he's somebody likes the spotlight. So I think in a certain sense, he enjoyed, kind of seeing the show. I mean, there's some real issues surrounding the fact that, a lot of people made a lot of money off the show, and it does not include Joe Exotic. And so, that's something that we're going to be, dealing with very forcefully in the not too distant future here. And also there are a lot of, things that people have said about Joe, both in court and out of court, that are totally false. And so, it was very interesting to be able to get his point of view on the specifics of all these, issues and things that occurred from firsthand knowledge.
Okay. So, Mr. Roots, from like a 10,000 foot perspective, I've been doing some reading, and I see that there may have been some witnesses that changed their tune after the fact. Before I ask my primary question, is that accurate? Have there been some witnesses that recanted what they said during the trial?
Yeah, that's one of the major things that we're focusing on.
Okay.
If I could just say where it's all sort of sitting right now. He has he went, he's had his main appeal, his direct appeal, and he actually won a sentencing issue. It was kicked back down to the district court, Western District of Oklahoma, for resentencing.
Yeah, he lost 1 year off the 22-year sentence I saw.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Which, honestly,
who cares?
You could argue that was the lower judge sort of overturning the upper court, as they say. But anyway, so he got 1 year off. But anyway, that direct appeal didn't really focus on the crux of the situation, which was the fact that he was wrongfully convicted. The witnesses, almost every single one of them, was incentivized in one way or another improperly. And that information was really just newly discovered after the trial. And Joe probably suffered from some counsel that, I'm not going to totally throw him under the bus, but he didn't get the best representation along the way by more than one source. There was one lawyer, though, Mr. John Phillips, who actually did, I'd say, yeoman's work, got many witnesses to come forward, actually got sworn statements indicating that they had, in fact, provided false testimony at his trial. And this is the most recent thing, the big thing. It might be the final thing before his habeas stuff, but they filed a very, very big and powerful and important motion for new trial based on newly discovered evidence, citing all this massive record of recanted testimony. And the lower court, basically the same judge in Western District of Oklahoma who has presided over all this stuff, including the Carol Baskin lawsuit, where Carol Baskin took him for everything he had, basically destroyed his zoo, took everything he had. The same judge has presided over every single facet and feature of the litigation. And so arguably you could say that judge has a particular angle on Joe Exotic's situation. And I'll just say that we're focusing. We took over the appeal at a very late stage. We barely. Let's put it this way: we filed a motion to essentially amend his appellate brief, which it doesn't get granted that often. But we did get an opportunity now. That's where we are right now, and that's what I'm working on. to amend his original appellate brief. And, I'll tell you, we're focusing on the lower judge's, I'll say, improper test for ruling on motions for new trial. And so it'll be probably a straightaway legal argument we're going to make. We do believe that he is entitled to a new trial, so he should get that reversed and get a new trial. And if he does so, it'll be huge. This will be a major thing. But right now, you could say we sort of salvaged the case near the very end.
Right. So
yeah, and to put a kind of a fine point on the issue of sort of witnesses recanting or changing their testimony, you really think about this for a second. This was an alleged murder for hire plot. Those were two of the counts that he got convicted of, right? And the alleged hitman, who was obviously a major star witness for the government at trial, has now fully recanted in a sworn affidavit on camera and said that the whole thing was fake and that it never happened. And so, it's just out. And there were multiple other witnesses who have now recanted their testimony, really gutting the government's case. And when you really think about it from that standpoint, we are obviously very hopeful, and we think that he should be at the very least granted a new trial.
And for the purported hitman, does he say what his motivation was for testifying wrongfully before?
So if you watch the second season of the Tiger King, that's actually really brought into focus kind of the just all of the different plots and plans that were in place to attack Joe Exotic, to harm his business interests, to harm his reputation of various actors, and so he was really just set up, and I think in light of what we're going to show in terms of new evidence. We hope that the 10th Circuit at least grants him a new trial. Honestly, I think the government should just dismiss the case.
Yeah, I mean, he's already spent he's been in since 2018, so close to 6 years in prison at this point, right?
Yeah.
So one thing I'm not certain of, because I'm from Oklahoma and I actually interned with the U.S. Attorney's Office there in Oklahoma City after my 1L year of law school. But I have no idea what they usually do when you get a case set for a new trial. As far as the U.S. Attorney's Office there, is it a situation where they're likely to give you some kind of deal and just say, okay, credit for time served, take this felony on your record, go away? Or are they going to go full guns blazing on something like this and try to do a full new trial, you think?
Well, I'll tell you, I have I've seen it go both ways. Frequently, they have 30 days to declare to the judge. If an upper court orders a new trial, they have 30 days to declare whether or not they're going to pursue a new trial. And they do size up how many years the person has spent in prison. What's the benefit of a new trial? The witnesses, or are they still around? Are they still on the government side or whatnot? And so frequently they make the call not to pursue a new trial. Now, I've seen also, there are murder cases where frequently at the state level, where the prosecutors will just keep trying and retrying, and no matter how many times an appellate court finds errors, they just keep one trial after another. And I think the all-time record might be 7 or 8 trials in a murder case, Louisiana or Mississippi somewhere. So in those kinds of cases, they do just keep coming.
Sure.
But in this case, the sentence is 21 years. He's already done, arguably a third of that, something like that. The witnesses have recanted. Let's put it this way. I'll just say, if I were a prosecutor, I wouldn't. If this 10th Circuit rules the right way and orders a new trial, or at least bare minimum orders the lower court to more properly analyze the application for new trial. Let's put it that way. If I were a federal prosecutor, I would drop it right then, because these witnesses, now they've all changed their story. They have all recanted and indicated they gave improper testimony at the original trial. Now, what do you do if you're a prosecutor with that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I was a state prosecutor before, and that's not the situation I want to find myself in. I can tell you, putting my prosecutor hat back on, I'm a defense attorney now. That would be a real difficult situation, and you're faced then with the question: am I going to try to bring them up on perjury charges?
It's so bizarre. John mentioned the problems with the so-called hired hitman. The hired hitman has never been even threatened with prosecution. Now, think about how strange that is. Not even a hint, not a threat of arrest. And the lower judge, I guess, explained this, saying, well, he never meant to go through with it. He was lying from the very beginning. Now, just think about that. Now, the situation, as you know, is a little bit complicated.
Sure.
There was this Tiger King TV producer who was actually paying. There were film producers paying almost all the material witnesses, got payments of one kind or another. Arguably, I think we would argue that they were being paid for dramatic effect. All right. And so this actually does enter into, the version of events from the perspective of every single witness. So if this hired hitman never meant, he was lying the entire time, never meant to go through with it, and that's the basis for the explanation of not even to threaten to charge him. What does that say about entrapment? What does that say about what really happened? I would argue that in the context of this, it never happened. It just did not happen.
Sure.
That
Joe Maldonado, of course, that's his real name. He's I'll just say a shit talker. I don't know if I can say that on this
You're fine.
broadcast.
You're fine.
He's a guy that obviously likes to shoot his mouth off a lot.
Sure.
And that's part of his persona, his character. He's a very colorful character. So that really played the role, and that really is the essence of what happened.
Sure.
This was a guy who talked a lot of shit, and he did have the animosity with Carol Baskin, of course, is very real. She was the rival zoo owner and had a tiger, a so-called rescue zoo in Florida. Right. The rivalry is very real. But nonetheless, a lot of this was nothing but chit chat and talk and hyperbole.
That's so interesting too, that the judge would take the perspective to say, well, he was just faking. He wasn't really going to do anything, because you're kind of invading the province of the fact finder there, right? Wouldn't that be the jury's job, or a jury's job, to determine what was truthful, who was lying, what each particular person's motivations were, right? Like, you're putting the cart way before the horse there. It seems really weird to me that a judge would make that determination.
They have to fill in the gaps sometimes to justify it to themselves, though, right? I think.
Yeah, but that's not their job.
I know, but
I don't know.
And I'll say another thing that factors into these witnesses. Every single major important witness in Joe Maldonado's case was incentivized in one way or another by the government, and by the way, arguably by the Tiger King production operation that was also in the background at that time. Of course, no one at that time knew it was going to be this huge Netflix blockbuster that it was. Joe Maldonado did not know that. Nobody knew. But in the background, there was all these influences making people make dramatic statements. And, there was another guy, Jeff Lowe. I don't know if you know.
I remember him, but for the life of me, I cannot remember the name of the guy that was the supposed hired hitman, who was Jeff's buddy.
Well, I have his name.
It was Alan Glover, I believe.
Right,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
And again, when I say that the judge indicated he could not be prosecuted, let me say it is ridiculous that he was not under the understanding that he had to testify the way the government wanted in order to prevent himself from being prosecuted. Now, just think about that. Every single major witness knew that they all had issues, and they had to testify the way the government wanted.
Sure.
And this is a major thing. And by the way, the prosecutors in these cases argue, well, they didn't have an immunity agreement. Well, okay, it's almost worse if they don't have an immunity agreement on paper. It's almost worse when you think about it. Because when you have an immunity agreement, things are very clear, and it's very clear you've got to provide truthful testimony. When there is no immunity agreement, it's more like the sword of Damocles that is dangling above your head, where you don't have a deal what you know is you need to please the government or you
Right.
could be prosecuted.
Did
And it's even worse.
Did the purported hitman have an attorney at that time advising him to, to say, hey, yeah, you do have to agree, or did he just not even have anybody in his corner?
I don't believe he did. I don't believe he did ever.
Yeah, no, of course he's going to cave then.
Yeah, that's nuts. So I don't know much about the underlying trial. I know that from the series they kind of touched on it a bit, but they don't go into some of these finer details. Did this stuff get brought up for impeachment evidence whenever these people are testifying? Did trial counsel at least do the right thing they should have done during trial to point out some of these potential issues with these witnesses' credibility?
Well, the answer is some yes, but the newly discovered evidence came largely when this lawyer named John Phillips started to, almost in the wake of the Tiger King show, started to contact some of these people, these witnesses, and he actually was able to obtain the cell phones and go through things like that, the cell phone actual records, to show that there was a lot that was missing. There was a lot that the government knew that was not provided. So this is newly discovered evidence by definition.
Wait, there were Brady issues?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the main witnesses was James Garretson, who was arguable. I think he would admit to becoming an informant. He was actually an undercover informant, recorded a lot of statements at the time. And turns out that we know after the trial was over, especially from looking at the cell phone of that individual, James Garretson, that there were a lot of videos and audio recordings that he recorded that were never provided. By the way, some of it apparently was not provided to the prosecution, and some of it was provided to the prosecution, but not provided to the defense. So it's a combination of things.
Yeah, no, that's Brady versus Maryland. Boom.
So that's problematic. Okay, so I'm obviously thinking, ahead here. Is this a situation where the conduct is bad enough that there's potentially some kind of 1983 claim for the state's conduct?
Well, let's put it this way. We've got to overturn the convictions first.
Sure.
There you go.
Obviously, I don't know. I'm just because that sounds pretty bad. The way it's being packaged here is pretty awful.
They're not going to comment on
all right,
ongoing
I know.
stuff.
I've been trying not to ask questions that I knew might interfere or be something you're not supposed to answer because you've got ongoing litigation. But man, I got so many questions. That's crazy. That's awful. All right. So with respect to the appeal, you said you got leave to amend the original. What's the timeline? Can we talk about that?
It's very short. I can tell you that. In fact, I think we only have, the other side, the prosecution consented to us getting an extension, but I think let's put it this way. We are under an absolute hard, a very, very, very soon approaching deadline on it. It could be a week or two. I'd have to look at the actual deadline date.
And then they'll get their reply or opposition, and then you'll get to reply. And then how long will it take? And again, it's just because I don't know practically how the 10th Circuit works. How long will it take to actually have oral argument on it?
That's a good question. I would anticipate we're talking a 6-month schedule at least 6 months out, probably.
Okay. So you hope to have maybe an answer on what's going on by sometime next year, you think?
Hopefully so.
Okay.
It's hard you can never really predict because often the longer it takes, the better sometimes from our perspective.
Sure.
Not always, but frequently it means that the court is drafting a long, detailed analysis of some kind, which hopefully benefits the appellant. That would be us. Who knows? It's hard to say. The average appeal, of course, takes over a year or about a year. Of course, this is a very complicated appeal with lots of issues.
Right. And then Mr. Pierce was saying that you are primarily spearheading this one. How do you guys work together on this, or do you guys handling separate elements of what the what Joe Exotic is dealing with, legally speaking?
We pretty much, work on everything together. We're actually a pretty small firm, but we have a massive caseload. There are just there's so many situations right now in the country where, folks' civil liberties and constitutional rights are being violated. And there are just not a lot of attorneys who are willing to take on these fights. And so we just have a massive number of cases. So we really work, as one team on every case, and, just kind of make sure that we match up, what strengths folks have in terms of, what kind of tasks and that kind of thing. But yeah, we essentially do everything together, and we've tried all these January 6 cases together. Roger, actually, he had one very major January 6 case that I could not be involved in because I had kind of a conflict of interest situation, but he represented Dominic Pizzola, who was one of the Proud Boys in the 4.5 month long Proud Boys trial for January 6th. And he actually got the only acquittal on a seditious conspiracy charge.
That's awesome.
In that case, along with some other not guilty verdicts and hung jury counts.
Since we're talking about that, my understanding with the January 6th stuff is that they've just been divvying out prison terms like it's candy. Like there's a massive amount of years that have been ordered in those cases. Is that correct? Like throughout all the defendants?
Yeah, in fact, I've analyzed this. The January 6 sentences, the longest sentences, are twice as long as sentences from any other prior political riot in American history. So if you go back in American history and look at all the anti-war riots, the civil rights movement, even the Civil War, there have been riots throughout American history. None of them produced the prison sentences that we are seeing that are being handed down in these January 6 cases. In fact, I recall in law school, we learned about the Eugene v. Debs case, who was convicted of sedition, supposedly, sedition during World War I, supposedly affecting the morale of the troops or whatnot. Right. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison and actually ran for president from prison. And, in law school, they teach you that was one of the biggest miscarriages of justice, an absolute injustice, 10 years for basically giving speeches. Well, I can tell you that Enrique Tarrio, who was the leader of the Proud Boys, convicted in January 6, was sentenced to 22 years for essentially giving speeches and writing memes. And he wasn't even there. He was actually watching the events from a motel room on television.
Right. 22
years in federal prison.
Yeah. The characterization of some of the things that I've seen, and again, I'm looking at everything from a third-person viewpoint, whatever's on the news, whatever I can dig up, what happens to be on social media. Well, I had social media at the time. The way that they characterize some of these people, especially that guy, very strange to me. I think I recall them calling him a white supremacist, and I'm pretty sure he's Hispanic of some sort. It just struck me as really odd, and it seemed more like a lot of this turned into some kind of witch hunt rather than trying to do, justice for people who may have gotten a little too excited on a day and done something that's slightly stupid, rather than somebody who was actually trying to, overthrow the government and do something crazy.
Yeah, a good example of that is one of our clients is a great grandmother, Rebecca Lawrence. She's kind of become known as the J6 praying grandma. She's a full Christian woman in her mid 70s, bed and breakfast owner from Colorado. No criminal record, obviously, and she just went to the Capitol to pray. That's all she did. She always stood behind the barricades and the fencing until they were moved out of the way by police. She did end up inside for about 10 minutes when the doors, were opened, and she just prayed. She didn't engage in any kind of violence or property destruction, and is no threat, certainly, to anyone. And we fought her case very hard, and we had the jury deliberating for about 4 days. She was convicted of the 4 kind of standard misdemeanors that they charge a lot of folks with, and we just had her sentencing last week. The government was asking for 10 or 11 months in federal prison for her. And we were successful in convincing the judge not to give her any prison time, but she did get 6 months home detention, 12 months probation, and then she was fined $103,000.
What? For what?
Yes. She was fined $103,000 under the rationale that she had been so successful in her fundraising which was for the purpose of paying for her defense. That she was essentially profiting off of her crime, as the argument goes, and they fined her $103,000. The other thing they did, which we believe is the largest misdemeanor fine in American history, the other thing they did was the judge ordered that during the 6 months home detention, she could have no internet access whatsoever. So she can't use email, she can't be on the internet, that's the kind of thing that you might get in child pornography.
I've never heard of
That's a basic human right now. Like a lot of courts have kind of established that access to information is one of those water,
I've never heard
food.
of someone losing their internet privileges unless it was
So even in cases where we've been pretty successful in many of our cases in limiting the prison time or getting no prison time in these misdemeanor cases, even a felony case or two. But even where we get no prison time, she gets hit with a massive, just financially devastating fine, and this kind of First Amendment violation of her ability to access and dispense information.
It feels like one of those dumb Instagram polls that are like, "Would you live in this house with no internet for
$103,000?" So I have to ask: does the statute not enumerate the amount of time and amount of possible maximum fine?
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of the fine, it's actually the maximum she could have had if you add up the 4 misdemeanor counts. If you were to stack them all on, actually could have been up to $300,000 statutorily.
What?
But none of but these judges, typically. These people who, most of whom can't pay, anything substantial, either get no fine or they get, a very de minimis fine. But I think that the government really wanted to send a message because she had been, she's very articulate. She'd been very vocal about January 6th and, what's going on in the country and, the sort of the role that, God plays in America, or, her mantra is make America godly again. And I think they really, really, really did not like that. And this is someone, honestly, who should be, able to speak very freely heading into the 2024 election. And this really limits her ability to do that. So you got some very strange things going on with respect to, how the government is handling these January 6 cases.
That is so strange to me.
So when she inevitably might not pay this, does it convert to a judgment against her? And is that dischargeable? Not?
Well, it is part of the judgment. We're obviously going to appeal ferociously on her conviction or sentencing. So that'll take, I'm sure well over a year to go to the DC circuit. And then if we, probably need to go to the Supreme Court. And so, in theory, the government can go ahead and, execute on the judgment and start trying to collect on it. And so, this is what, these regular Americans are being hit with for it was essentially First Amendment activity.
Do you guys get to bring in any of kind of the extraneous stuff, which seems like these people are being targeted for having a specific viewpoint? More so than whatever the conduct is?
Yeah, so Roger's actually done a deep dive in this, and we've definitely filed some really, really in-depth motions on this. I'll let Roger handle that one.
Let me just say, I'm the recent testimony of the FBI director. What's his name, John? The current FBI, Chris
Wray.
Chris Wray was recently before Congress, and he said that there's a Inspector General report coming that's everybody's waiting for with bated breath, which according to Chris Wray will say that the defense, hundreds have pled guilty, hundreds have been convicted. No one has raised these issues about it being entrapped and Fedsurrection and all these undercover feds that were setting everybody up. Well, I can tell you, our team raises this in pretty much every single case. And here's what happens: the government, before every trial, actually sometimes from the moment a case commences, files motions to prevent all discussion of a list of things, one of which is any issues involving any police misconduct. Can't mention it. Anything involving, informants or anything like that. Can't even bring it up. So we try to bring it up. I can tell you many times, there'll be a government witness on the witness stand. I will cross-examine. I'll say, well, what about informants? What about this or that? The government always objects. The judge always sustains the objection. Oof. And it ends right there. We can never look into it. you think, the pipe bomb issues, we're all aware of the pipe bomb issues. I think by now every American knows that those were, it was some kind of undercover operation of some kind. We still don't know. But everybody realizes this at this point. It was an undercover operation of some kind of false flag thing. We never get to ask any questions about it. We are shut down immediately every single time.
Wouldn't that impact your ability to mount a defense under Jacobson versus United States, which is where the entrapment elements come from?
Well, here's what we deal with. The judge will say, well, in your client's case, was he, what can he say about being directly entrapped? All right. And by the way, we have had John and I haven't had a couple clients that had issues like that. We had a guy named Joe Thomas. Joe Thomas was, he's now in federal prison doing almost 5 years, but he had a moment where a strange person who he did not know hands him a pocket knife, just hands him a knife and says, why don't you cut this tarp or some zip ties or something? He, our client, Mr. Thomas, pondered this for maybe a second or two and then handed the knife back. All right, just think about that. So there's an undercover person or a stranger that we still do not know the identity of. Very strange that people are just handing knives to people. So that's one example, and we never really get to the bottom of these things. We have found out that the first people that broke windows at the U.S. Capitol, the first guy on the east side of the Capitol to break a window was actually a young guy like 18 or 19 years old who was Antifa. All right, so he was a left winger. You hear the mainstream media say, well, there's no such thing. It didn't happen. There was no Antifa. I can tell you the first guy to break a window on the Capitol was an absolute Antifa activist. His name was Hunter Emke. Let's go to the west side. The west side of the Capitol was where all the most ferocious action was. The first guy to break a window on the west side is unknown. We have lots of video of him,
and
lots of video.
That's the real thing that gets my brain going and makes me want to ask a bunch of questions. My understanding is that they retroactively went through all this video, identified all these different people, and then the FBI started showing up at folks' houses, correct?
Well, yeah, in many ways, yeah.
So if that's true, then there is almost no way they don't know who that dude is. And then there was another guy. I didn't do a deep dive into this, but I remember when it came out, there were a bunch of questions I had. It's one of those situations where it kind of makes you go, huh? There was that older guy in the red shirt that kept saying, come on, let's storm the Capitol. And people were standing around him, no, and they kept calling him a Fed. This dude is one of the ones that I think he ended up with a misdemeanor. Huh?
Yeah, Ray Epps.
Yeah, that's the guy.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. To me, that seems like they're definitely getting in the way of mounting an affirmative defense when you have things like this that are common knowledge. It was on every major news source in the country. That guy's picture was plastered all over the place, and I still don't think, and maybe you can correct me on this, I don't think they have an answer whether or not he was some kind of CI or something like that for the feds. Was he?
That's funny. I'm actually the guy. I have my signature is on a subpoena for Ray Epps, and I subpoenaed him to be a witness in the Proud Boy trial. Toward the end of the trial, we had a process server that we hired out in northern Arizona who was, waiting outside his ranch for days. We actually had a process server trying to find and track down Ray Epps. We never could find him. And at about the same time, he appears on 60 Minutes, and he says, well, I was never an FBI informant. Okay, well, that's a very specific statement. Now, remember, the federal government had many agencies that were operating on January 6th.
Correct.
And we think one of the largest operations is still largely unexplored, and that is something called HSI, Homeland Security Investigations. And you can Google them. They're a new agency that has only been in existence for a few years, maybe 10 years. It's not the Department of Homeland Security. It is an agency within Homeland Security called Homeland Security Investigations. Okay, we know for a fact that agency had undercovers on January 6th because there was a guy in Florida, I think his name was Brown. Forget his first name. Jeremy Brown. Jeremy Brown in Florida, who has a military background, and he was largely set up. But anyways, he recorded federal agents knocking on his door, and he recorded the conversation. Federal agents knocked on his door and said, "Hey, we want you to, become an informant for us and go to work." This was in about December of 2020. So this was before January 6th. Mm-hmm. So he recorded this conversation on the porch of his own house. And they were not FBI agents. They were HSI. Mm-hmm. And they wanted him to be an informant for the upcoming January 6th events. Okay. And in that conversation, he recorded the HSI agent saying something to the effect of, "We have a lot more stops to make today, so you got to make a decision really fast." In other words, HSI, again, that's not the FBI. It's a different agency completely, said on that recording that they had a lot of other people they were squeezing at that time, trying to turn into informants for the upcoming January 6th events. So for Ray Epps to say, "Well, no, I was never an FBI informant," that's a very specific answer.
Sure.
And we've never really gotten to the bottom. As you said, he did sort of almost staged thing. He pled to a misdemeanor, disorderly conduct, essentially. And the whole thing, I guess they wanted everybody to feel like that was the end of no more needed to be answered. Well, we have a lot of questions about Ray Epps and so many other individuals.
Well, the first thing, and I'm presuming I already know the answer to this, I'm guessing Mr. Epps got a disproportionately small sentence and fine compared to everybody else.
Yeah, no jail time, nothing.
That's wild.
No $100,000 fine either, I guess.
103,000.
Oh, sorry.
Man.
Another thing that's happening, another thing that happens in these trials, which I think is important for people to know about, and this was just shocking to me, honestly, is that the government files motions in limine before every one of these trials to prevent us from essentially arguing the Constitution in these cases, to prevent us from arguing the First Amendment or the Second Amendment, in cases that might involve a Second Amendment issue. And the judges really consistently have actually forbidden us from even using the words First Amendment or Second Amendment as advocates in these trials. As a matter of fact, in the Rebecca Lovren's case, it went so far as essentially the judge there initially ordered the defendant, when she took the stand, that she could not, in explaining, what she was doing or intending on January 6th, she could not use the phrase First Amendment. And we fought that, probably for several hours, that particular issue. Ultimately, the judge changed his position. But what he essentially did was he said, "Well, okay, Ms. Lovrens, you can use the phrase First Amendment, but you have a choice. If you choose to do that, then I'm going to have to give the jury essentially a limiting instruction, or an instruction telling them that the First Amendment is not a defense in this case, right?" And so, you have a lot of things going on in these cases that just makes it extraordinarily challenging for defendants.
That's absurd. I never would have thought that would be a thing, that you'd have a sitting federal judge tell you couldn't bring up, basic.
It's almost yeah. And by the way, I do have a lot of respect for this judge and other judges, but obviously we disagree with them strongly on a lot of these things. It's almost like in these courts in D.C., at least for the time being, there's almost a sort of an allergic reaction to the Constitution when it comes to these January 6th cases, which is just very troubling, and it was really shocking to me.
I mean, the worst thing to me is it seems, and maybe this is like my tinfoil hat moment, but it seems kind of telling. That they're taking a position before the determination has been made, but what the determination is and should be.
Yeah, and so for example, going back to this idea of being able to delve into what really happened on January 6th with respect to undercovers and leftists and whatnot. The rationale, as Roger said, the rationale that the judges use typically in terms of us not being able to get into that stuff is that it's not relevant to that particular defendant's state of mind or the actions of that particular defendant. But then that creates a massively unfair situation, because in all of these cases, the government has extraordinary leeway to dirty up these defendants, even misdemeanor defendants with no allegations of violence or property destruction, to dirty them up by playing, all of these videos of all of the, of the real violence that did occur on January 6th, in the worst places. So they can be very general in terms of what they can bring in about, overall what happened on January 6th. But we are, 99% of the time, we are prevented from doing the same thing for the defendant.
Which is strange when you have a mens rea element to these charges, because that's what the crux comes down to, right? You entered the building.
Yeah,
sure.
a lot of times.
Why did you do
with
it?
a lot of these, yeah, with a lot of these defendants, especially on the east side, as Roger said, a lot of the really sort of the action, so to speak, was on the west side. A lot of these defendants who were simply walking around, wandered in an open door, and left. They had no idea what happened on the west side until they went back to their hotel rooms and started watching the news coverage, right?
Sure.
And so, the government's able to show these montages that, show all this crazy, violence in one area, and the defendant had nothing to do with that, didn't even know what was happening.
That's crazy.
And I would add, every single indictment and every single misdemeanor information or accusation begins with the statement that the DOJ writes the statement that the attack on the Capitol happened this or that on January 6th, the attack on the Capitol. And so they frame each case as an attack on the Capitol. And think about it. This frames the entire assessment of what happened, because, we've had judges say, the defendant, clearly was on the Capitol grounds. The government argues these Capitol grounds were like a fortress, like little. I mean, you can't. The first witness in every one of these trials usually is a Capitol police officer who takes the stand with a uniform full of medals and says, "Oh, this Capitol on January 6th was like a fortress." Fences and gates and barricades, and signs were everywhere. They put on exhibits, signs saying, closed area, etc. And of course, none of that was in place at the time most of these defendants got to the Capitol, because they were walking over from the Ellipse, which is about a mile away, where Trump had spoke. So the only people who saw signs and barricades and gates were the first, 100 people, 200 people. They might have seen some signs and gates and barricades, but most of our clients, most of them, the vast majority, showed up at a time when all that stuff was down. It was a festive atmosphere. All they saw were just hundreds, thousands of people having a good time all over the Capitol grounds. And these judges will actually sort of assess the situation as, taking the government's claims at face value that this was a totally closed area, totally restricted, even the Capitol grounds, the grass, the sidewalks. And so the defendant had no good reason to be there. So if it's framed as an attack on the Capitol, then it's nothing but the person's presence was there for, harming Congress, injuring, obstructing the proceedings, disrupting things. The way they frame it, there can be no purpose to communicate ideas, to advocate, no First Amendment purpose whatsoever. And that's the way these judges frame January 6th from the beginning. And it poisons the entire trial, and it poisons every one of these cases from the very beginning, such that the First Amendment is never available as a defense. They block us from even bringing it up. And they literally rule that the defendant had no reason to be there other than to attack, the Capitol, attack Congress or whatever. And it's just bogus. These cases will go down in history as a blight on the Bill of Rights. It's just an absolute scandal.
And you're just destroying an element that's left for the fact finder, right? What was their intention? Why were they there? What was not, the crowd, that person, right? Why was she there? Why was he there? And that seems a bit strange to me that they would do that. But again, it gets back to what I was saying about how it seems like it's almost a foregone conclusion. Well, gentlemen, I have to say personally, I'm a big fan of what our country stands for and the constitutional rights that we have. So for people like you that defend that, for everyday Americans, from not just the January 6th folks, but the other people, the other clients that you have, I can, as an American, say thank you for the work that you do. I think it's amazing. I'm sure sometimes probably a little thankless. So I love the Constitution, and thank you for what you do. I appreciate it.
And what?
Thank you for saying that. We, as you can imagine, from various directions, we don't get a lot of kind words. So that really means a lot. And I want to mention, Joe Maldonado, Joe Exotic really does need help in order to be able to have the resources.
That was going to be my next question. Tell people what they can do.
Same.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So this is going to take a lot of work. Just to get through the appellate courts to try to get things back to, say, a new trial or whatnot. It's going to take a ton of work. I mean, we're talking, well into the six figures of, even the discounted rates that we've, tried to help them out with. And so, folks can go to Give, Send, Go. It's Free Joe Exotic after the /. Also, the website, freejoeexotic.com, goes straight to that Give, Send, Go page. So basically, folks go to freejoeexotic.com. That will take them to the Give, Send, Go page, and any little bit helps. So we'd ask everybody out there who enjoyed watching the Tiger King to help out a little bit, because he's an innocent man and he very badly needs help right now.
Okay, and then the next question, not just for Joe Exotic, but also for the rest of the cases that you guys have got going on. Some of it's pretty serious. How can people stay informed about what your firm's doing and what you guys are doing?
Yeah, I think the easiest way actually is to go to the NCLU website, because we try to keep that updated in terms of things that we're doing, but also some other folks. So if you go to nclu.org, that's the National Constitutional Law Union. So it's nclu.org. There's a really good summary of what cases are going on, and folks can actually donate there, and that will help all the January 6th defendants that we're representing, and some other. We also still represent Carter Page if that case comes back down to the trial court from the DC Circuit, with the FISA abuse. So there's lots of stuff they're doing, in which the Constitution is it's been shredded. It's in dire risk of really being put out of existence here. And we obviously is an election coming up that can play a big role in that. But it's not just about politicians. I mean, we have to fight these battles in the court and really, apply the Constitution in the trenches in order to preserve it over time. So that's the best place to go.
Sure. Well, we'll go ahead and put both of those URLs at the bottom of the episode to make it easier for folks that want to take a look at that. And you got any more questions, Sean?
No, I just wish we could do more, personally too.
I mean, I don't know if my brain pan is up to the level of you two guys. I mean, I generally feel somewhat smart when I walk into a room and then I start listening to you guys talking. I'm like, geez, I better be quiet or I'm going to sound like an idiot over here. No, we try to do what we can in our little neck of the woods and in our corner of the world. But definitely seeing people like you, it makes me feel empowered that maybe someday I'll have the opportunity to give back on a national scale or a national stage. And hopefully when that time comes, I'll be up to the task like you gentlemen are.
We love fighting against the government.
Yeah. And remember,
that's Roger's thing for sure. But no, thank you for providing us this platform. Happy to come on again and help us spread the word.
Yeah, and as always, listeners, don't talk to cops.
Don't talk to cops at all.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Have a good day.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, we want to thank our special guest for being on. Obviously, about Joe Exotic. Help out if you can. Donate to Joe's cause. We'll see what we can do to get involved too. And shout out Oklahoma City Baseball Club. Justin's from Oklahoma City. The events of Tiger King.
Not from Oklahoma City.
You're from the area.
I was born in Oklahoma, raised in Kansas, but I lived in Oklahoma City for a little while.
Across the border. We had Tulsa a couple weeks.
Yeah.
We got Oklahoma City. This is their Hispanic night, Cielo Azul, which means blue sky. Very pretty blue skies out there in Oklahoma.
Yeah, the Midwest in general. Very, very open, very nice.
Beautiful skies.
Green. I believe they call it Montana's big sky country, but it's kind of like the whole Midwest is that way because you don't have a lot of crap in your way.
Yeah.
You kind of just look up and see the stuff.
No blinding lights.
No. But yeah, Oklahoma City, it's interesting. I have a friend that is a lawyer there in Oklahoma City, and she was just griping to me about it because they used to have a name.
They don't have a name. They're the baseball club this year.
Yeah,
they're going to have a name. But this is their Hispanic night, so they have, they used to be the Dodgers.
Yeah.
After the LA Dodgers.
Yeah, because that's who they fed.
That's who they're affiliated with, but they're getting a new name soon. But for now, Cielo Azul, blue sky, cool logo. Thanks for listening again to another episode of Tangled Rights.
Gracias.
Tune in next week. Robert Tellis episode.
Hell yeah.